We're live.
Yay.
Boards, games, boards, games. We might be talking about area impulse, but we're not gonna shout. This was a strange one for us both. And we had to do things which I wrote, and we'll talk about how it's a bit weird. I guess it's not as bad as I feared. I guess I understand it now a little bit, and we'll tell you about this mechanism before we quit. As always, here's our friend Alan Paull, and we'll hopefully make some sense before we fall.
Hooray.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m.ish UK time for Bezzy Beats and Board Game Bladder. Today,
Yay.
it's the next episode in Pondering Mechanisms, and we are talking about area impulse going. I just want to really mention that we're following the list of Board Game Geek mechanisms, and once we've taken the years to go through this, after that, it feels like we should then have another series going through the book.
I was hoping for a rhyme for area impulse, Bez, but you managed to avoid it.
So yes, just a very quick introduction. Area impulse is a thing, and I had no idea what this thing was before, like 2 weeks ago. Were you familiar with this term, area impulse?
I wasn't familiar with the term, although I have played games with it in it, but I wasn't familiar with the term. So
you say you've played Star Wars Rebellion before?
I have, yes.
I've played Eclipse, which is listed here, but I don't think it's actually area impulse. And yeah, I feel like just reading through some of the rules that are available has given me a good sense of what this is all about.
Right. Don't you think that we should probably... Do you want to read it out? Shall I read it out? Or are we going to do that later? So that people know what it is? Because...
Well, yeah, I feel like we should read it out as it's defined on Board Game Geek.
Shall I do that?
Sure, you read it.
Yes, okay. Players subdivide turns into impulses alternating between players, which repeat until both players pass, or in some cases, a sunset die roll ends the impulses, catching one or both players off guard. In those impulses, a group of units is once activated or gets to act collectively before being marked spent. However,
and so I think we should pause here.
There's quite a lot actually.
I think we should pause here to explain it as we go. So this impulse means that rather than having one big turn where you do all your stuff, you have impulses which alternate, and then there's the kind of end of turn phase where you maybe get your resources or do whatever. But carry on.
No. However, instead of the activated units being grouped by a certain radius from a leader, the units activated are in an area, and thus the need for the impulse system to have areas, not hexes. That's important because this has come from war games, and I think
it's notable that this is the only impulse system actually listed on Board Game Geek, so there is no radial impulse or other form of impulse listed on Board Game Geek.
Yeah, the areas exist to define scope of activation on an impulse, as well as restrict what can be done on that impulse with respect to attack and movement range. Thus, each of a player's groups of units each acts once by means of small alternating impulses instead of by the traditional all my units, then all your units. Finally, before the next round of impulses, spent units are reset, regaining the ability to act. So the critical things in that are that once you've activated the units, you mark those as done, and they don't get to act again in most cases until the next round. Yeah,
I think the critical thing is really the fact that it's not my turn and then your turn. It's subdivided, and it kind of analogous to the follow system in Puerto Rico, where I will pick something and then everyone else does it. I mean, it's completely different, of course, but any game where everyone's doing the thing, like simultaneous reveal. It brings a form of, yeah, it makes turns feel shorter, potentially, arguably.
Yes. It's usually compared with I go, you go, which is I do all of my stuff. But this is why the hex board games is a good reference point, because when they first came out back in the day, you have hexes, so all your units going on. And usually, you've got a unit or a stack of units on a hex, and you move by hexes. And usually, in those games, you activate all of your side, and you do everything with your side first, and then your opponent goes.
But I think it's important to note that the areas can be hexes. I mean, Twilight's Imperium is very much an area impulse game, and the areas are these hexes.
But the point about the in a sense, the point about the traditional hex and counter game is the fact that you've got a whole range of those, which are almost invariably I go, you go, suggests to a designer, I suppose, anyway, that, well, why don't we do something different and have a different mechanism for activating units? And the kind of, is it the opposite? It's a bit like the opposite of the hex and counter thing is area impulse, activating a group of your units. And it's similar to the concept of activating a single type of unit, which is also quite commonly used. So there's lots of things which link to this one.
And it is, I think before we take a step back, I just think it's worth noting, actually, I think, that firstly, there is no other impulse system with this definition of impulse listed on Board Game Geek. There's no unit type impulse, there's no radial impulse, even though that's referred to. And the second thing worth noting is that impulse movement is completely different, and I feel like we should probably get there when we get to impulse movement.
Yeah, sure.
So, but first of all, I think it's worth talking about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. Personally, yesterday I was in, I was in Birmingham. It was, sorry, not Birmingham, Manchester. What am I talking about?
That's right. I thought you were in Manchester. I was, and you were, yes.
Oh, you were in Manchester yesterday. I thought you were.
Sorry, not yesterday. Sorry, not yesterday. No, we were back home yesterday.
I'm talking about yesterday.
Oh, right.
My recent highlights are just for yesterday.
Oh, I see.
So I just want to quickly skim through some photos that I shared. So this is Travelling Man.
Excellent.
And there's a band. They've got a whole bunch of board games, but there's a lot of comics there. They don't do much open play, but they might in the evenings push all the comic stuff out of the way and get some magic or whatever every couple of weeks. I want to point out Fanboy 3, which you can see here.
Fanboy 3.
It's a very much larger store. It's even got to downstairs. This is a bit of the upstairs. This is a bit of the downstairs where they were still sorting out everything, hence the giant pile of boxes from Tabletop Gaming Live. It's not usually that messy, I should point out. And I just wanted to note, Dave's still got free copies of the Deluxe L deck, if that's something you fancy, as well as Yogi Guru and a whole bunch of games from from Helvetic. Have you been to both of these shops?
I have, yes. Yes, I like going to Manchester, especially when it's not raining. It held off from raining on Saturday. Did you notice? We didn't get rain on Saturday at Manchester, but we did on Sunday. So it was reassuring to have the rain on Sunday.
There was a tiny bit of drizzle on Saturday, but it wasn't too bad for sure. This is Buzz and Meeples.
Oh, I've
so
not heard
this
of
is
that.
a very new place in Prestwich, which is kind of in Manchester, but it's a bit north. It's still on the tram line. So if you're in Manchester, this is about 15 minutes, 20 minutes by tram, and this actually makes me wish that I lived here. They've got the most generous rental system that I've ever seen. You pay £10 or £20 per month, and you get to a bunch of games, and you're then allowed to just wander into store and change those games whenever you want. Being able to just go into store and change those games feels really good if you're able to get there easily.
Sounds brilliant. Yeah.
And this is outside, but you can see they've got a really nice selection.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, that's these are all unique games. They do have like some similar games, like a bunch of different railroad inks, and I played a few things, including teaching them how to play yogi. We also played the kids' version of Animal Upon Animal. I mean, when I say the kids' version, I mean my first Animal Upon Animal aimed at 2-year-olds. Have you seen this one?
Oh, we have Tier After Tier. Yes, we have this.
But that's the relatively grown-up version, which I think is maybe for 7 or 6 or something.
Oh, is it? Oh, it looks very similar. Although you've got cows in that one as well.
This is completely different.
Oh, is it?
So
Oh, in that case, I haven't seen that.
the important thing to note is that the pieces are much larger, and these are literally all the pieces. You can see that
I see.
as adults, it is a bit easier to put them out. There are 3 different game modes. One involves everyone stacking them up. You've got 9 turns. Can you get it? Hooray! If not, well, you don't get a sun token. The second version, you've got to roll the die to decide which of these 2 places it goes on. And the third version is a cooperative mode where you're trying to get everything stacked onto these 2 meadows before the rabbit makes all the way around.
Okay, right, yes.
And
that's really nice.
Yeah, as you can see, well, I should have probably put my hand in for scale, but this box is about the size of a small child.
Oh, right, okay.
It was literally probably this size, so it's fairly chunky. Also, Seasons of Rise. Have you played many Butts and Shy games? Do you know this one?
No, I don't know that one.
Taking turns. There's a nice, pleasant drafting system. You score for kind of triangular score, not quite triangular scoring, but it gets more and more better as you have larger areas. Houses increase the size of your areas essentially. Then you also score similarly for the number of people in an area. You really want to close off all your areas, but obviously you can't close off everything, but you want to make sure that your bulls and people and houses are in closed off areas. But then finally, you get one additional way to score, which in my case was the number of closed off houses multiplied by people divided by 2. And so, yeah, it was a lovely place. And you can see that I'm a bit biased because there's a few of my games there, but they do have some lovely stuff, unmatched. They've got like all the routes.
Those routes, yeah.
They've got, they're a big proponent of gender diversity. And Bus and Meatballs, I see, reply to that saying, almost wish I lived there. Yes, only almost, because there is enough going on in London that I do have other reasons to live in London still. But it was a lovely shop and it was a delightful visit, and I would highly recommend it to anyone in the area. Support a new business, someone doing something very much as a labour of love.
Yeah, Manchester was a good area to go to for Tabletop Gaming Live. We met a lot of people there who hadn't been to games conventions before. And that was really good to see. So we were actually explaining what these newfangled games were to people at the weekend, which was great. And on our stand, we had our Kingmaker display, so we got a lot of more people interested in Kingmaker. So that was also good. And I would say that my highlight of the last 3 days, we actually sold out of the stock that I took to Tabletop Gaming Live of March of Progress. It was our biggest seller.
Nice.
Which is the first convention, I think, that the
So
March
presumably, if you sold out, that
seller
must mean that it was financially worthwhile for you?
We sold out of the stock I took, not of the whole of March of Progress. We still have copies for sale.
Understood, but that means that it's exceeded your expectations, presumably.
It was definitely at the high end of my expectations, yes. I mean, particularly the Saturday. Sunday was a bit quieter, but even Sunday picked up a little bit in the middle of the day. So yeah, it was definitely at the high end of my expectations.
That's really
In
nice
terms
to
of
hear.
in terms of commercial, but going to Manchester and meeting all the new people was great. That was really good to see everybody turn out. I think they sold out of all the tickets to it. I heard from somewhere, so it seemed to be quite popular.
Tabletop Gaming Live sold out of
Well,
visitor
somebody
tickets?
told me that they sold out of tickets, but then I don't know. Maybe that's just marketing spin. I don't know. But
I find that hard to believe. I'm
well,
sure that the capacity must have been quite a bit more than the number who were there.
Yeah. I mean, certainly on the Sunday it was quite quiet.
It's nice to hear someone, well, a trader reporting that they had a good time, because as a visitor, I had a lovely time. You know, I was able to wander around, and I played a whole bunch of games I enjoyed. And when I didn't, I enjoyed being able to just spend time chatting to people without feeling, oh my gosh, I'm taking time away from you being with other people, and being able to sit down with games really easily. To be fair, I don't normally get a chance to wander around things. I'm still feeling like I'm glad I didn't go there personally, because my approach to conventions is basically capitalizing on a high footfall. That's kind of my model, whereas I think your model is very different.
Yes, I mean, we actually, for quite rare for us, we actually did some advertising. We had the back cover of the guide, woohoo, which is quite a lot of investment for us. And I think I kind of get the impression it did pay off. I never quite know how much good advertising actually does for us as a small company.
Oh, it's so hard to measure. And if you start saying, hey, what made you come over here? Then that question itself is going to turn people off.
Yes, yeah. But we had a lot of visitors. I think that part of our advantage was that we were in a very well lit part of the show, and a lot of the show was not well lit, so people were probably tending to gravitate more towards the light areas. So we lucked out in that sense. We did get lucky in the location. We're on the ground floor, big stand. We were alongside Triple Ace Games, so we've got a lot of footfall through being in the right place. And I do sympathise with the people who were perhaps upstairs in the less well lit areas, and they didn't really have such a good time as us. Anyway, that's tabletop gaming.
So it sounds like, because I've not spoken to you since I saw you on Saturday and Sunday at the event itself. So I'm not going to ask you for exact numbers, but it sounds like in terms of energy, in terms of financials, in terms of enjoyment, it was worth you coming on all of those axes, and you would definitely be going again, even if it was exactly the same thing.
I think we would. I think the venue was not the right venue. I think that's. I think 99% of the exhibitors would say that. I think the visitors were reasonably happy with it, and the visitors had a lot of fun, and that's what it's all about. It
feels like it did depend person to person, because I heard someone complaining on Tuesday where they said, "Oh, I just couldn't read the cards because it was too low light." Whereas for me, I could still see everything and read everything. Maybe because my eyes are a bit younger or better. I don't know.
I suspect they'll change the venue for next year. I hope they stay in Manchester, because I think if they can get a good venue in Manchester, it's a very good place to have a show. And it's 2 weeks before Essen. Is it 2 weeks before Essen? 3 weeks before Essen? Well, 2.5 weeks before Essen, which is a bit better than the Alexandra Palace version, which was the old one, which I think was only a week before Essen, I think, and that was much too close to Essen for us to
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
3. When is it? Yeah, something like that.
It's 3 weeks before. I mean, it's kind of
on the cusp for us of whether we could actually.
It's 2 weeks and a bit before you need to travel there. So 2 weeks and 1 day after Tabletop Gaming Live, you will start your drive to Essen.
Yes, right. Excellent.
Because, of course, whereas Essen, it is a long thing. It is 4 days for punters, but then for exhibitors, even before that Thursday, they might have been there from Monday potentially setting up.
Yeah. We always allow a week. So we travel on the Monday and we travel back on the following Monday. So we give ourselves, well, to be fair, we travel on the Monday and the Tuesday, don't we? So we break it in the middle. So that's a whole big other thing. What else? I've got
Speaking of
another
which, I don't know what my data plan is going to be like in Germany. I'm not expecting to stream much. Do you what? Yeah, I assume. Yeah, like on the Tuesday, we're going to be in the car. I guess I'll do like a quick.
I'm sure there'll be some. I'm sure there'll be some streaming. I don't imagine you can stop yourself streaming.
But yes, I'll probably try and limit it to 5 minutes just for money reasons.
Oh gosh, yes, of course.
But for everyone, this is not meant to be about Tabletop Gaming Live and Essen. We are meant to be top. But before we get back, I would say brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant, which is light. And you know what? I'm going to actually
it's going back to Tabletop Gaming Live again.
It is, but readability also, because I was actually looking at the previews of the new Unset. Are you familiar with this Magic the Gathering set? They've just started the preview. So they've got a few different developments, one of which is that, I don't know if you're familiar with the silver bordered stuff in Magic. The idea of silver bordered is it's not tournament viable, but because people saw these silver borders and that meant that people wouldn't play them even in Commander and all the different sets which were meant to be fun. And so what they've done with the latest one is they've made them all black borders, but they've got a little acorn for about 50% of the cards are cards which don't really work within the rules. And they say these cards, you can't use them within the rules. But these other 50% of the cards are the cards that do work within the rules, and we are letting you use them. If you want to use them in Vintage or any of those Eternal formats, you can. But they are like a bit more wacky than we would do in a normal set. So they've actually got stickers which you can now use in normal Magic, which is really interesting. And some people are in an uproar, but frankly, this is no more wacky than the double face cards and all those other things that people were in uproar. Because back in the day, people were in an uproar about some cards that cost 0 mana.
Oh, so, of course. Absolutely.
Because that is the thing. The game has to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Yes, I mean, it has always surprised me that people get an uproar about changes in Magic the Gathering, and the whole point of the game is it changes. But anyway,
yes, my point was that there were a couple of cards. I don't know how it'll be different physically, but with the background and with the text treatments, it didn't seem to be super readable on my screen.
Oh, I see.
And I'm a bit concerned about that. And it does feel like, okay, if I pick it up and read it, okay, but there is so much text, it feels like a step backwards from the normal sets, if you know what I mean.
I don't understand that. I mean, I don't really have a leg to stand on because our Pocket Campaigns games we have very legible cards because we use large cards, but the rules are always quite tiny text. Sorry about that.
But yes, I guess what I'm saying is that light and readability and being able to read your things is really important. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
That was fairly negative for a brilliant thing.
Yeah. No, light is good.
Light. It allows us to see things. Yes. So as always,
light, we wouldn't know where we are.
Everyone in the comments, feel free to comment, ask questions from follow, but we are going to now be talking more about the mechanisms.
Yes, okay, good.
So where were we? How should we carry on? Should we crack on as usual with some examples?
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, the I don't know very many examples, unfortunately. The one I'm most familiar with is probably Star Wars Rebellion.
Let's actually
only played it twice.
Can we take a step back just to talk? Acknowledge the fact that yes, we are following Board Game Geek listings, and I feel like I should acknowledge the whole history of this. Previously, Board Game Geek had a bunch of mechanics, and they were a bit vague and maybe not the best organized, because things take effort and you can't do everything perfectly. And then Jeff Engelstein, Isaac Shalev wrote this book, and Scott Alden said, wow, this is a really good book. Would you be willing for me to use this as a basis for the Board Game Geek mechanisms? And then that's what they did. And for a while, it was what they've done is they've got some of the new mechanisms from that book and also some of the old ones which were grandfathered in, because they didn't want to just chuck away all the old stuff. There would be too much of an uproar. And it feels like you've got some weirdness, like area movement, which in the book is just, okay, area movements, grid movements, this is all listed under tessellation. But for area impulse, which is not in the book at all, but then, yeah, it feels like some things are just grandfathered in, and I do want to acknowledge that.
Yes, maybe the thing about including area impulse in Board Game Geek is there are quite a lot of games that use it, but I think, as Isaac said, it's defined, it's pretty narrow and specific in terms of its definition. And we just read it out. It's one of the longest definitions, I think, isn't it? In the on the BGG, it is very, very specific. But then again,
I mean, I've not done the word counts of all of them, but I would
be quite long, and it's really quite densely worded. It's actually relatively easy to explain, isn't it? I mean, basically, you activate an area, and then your opponent activates an area, and you keep alternating until all the areas have been activated that have things in them. And sometimes you might have a die roll which ends that impulse phase, impulse type of thing early, and that's basically. But what I'm surprised about is that it's defined as area impulse, when in fact it would have been probably easier or better to have some, I don't know,
impulse turn order,
or just I think if it is activation rather than impulse, because I know what they're doing in impulse, because it's they're trying to use a word which means one player does a small thing, another player does a small thing, and you keep alternating until you're finished, and that's fine. But if you look at, this is where we're going to go into a bit about impulse movement. If you look at impulse movement, it's completely different. And impulse movement is definitely a term which was used before. The classic impulse movement is Starfleet battles. There are 36 impulses, and your ship velocity is basically ship velocity defines which impulses it moves in. So, for example, if I have a ship which has got a 12 movement, I will move my ship a hex in every third impulse. And basically, you just count impulses. So, who moves on impulse 1, blah, who moves on impulse 2, blah, and you keep going like that. So everybody's moving their ships at the same time. Simultaneous movements. And it's a really, really effective mechanism.
It does feel like there's a lot of bookkeeping, but we're not talking about impulse movement.
But what I mean is they've used that term impulse in area impulse, but it actually, impulse in this sense has a completely different meaning. It doesn't mean the same thing as that type of impulse.
I feel like if I want to restate the term, the definition in my own words, I feel like there's a few different parts to this. So firstly, your turn is subdivided, and you're taking turns to activate a smaller subset of units rather than doing all your things and then all their things. That's one part of it. Secondly, it's the way you activate things is by area.
Yes.
Thirdly, there's the idea that once you activate an area, you can't go activate that area again, which I think it should be an important part of it, but we'll go into Rumble Nation, which is kind of different and adjacent to this, where you can activate the things again, and that would be area activation, because area activation doesn't mean that doesn't have anything to do with the impulse of the back and forth, back and forth, and it doesn't have anything to do with the you can only do each area once. The final thing of area impulse, as it's mentioned here, is that it carries on, well,
Either you have a sunset dice, which means you roll at the end of every impulse to see if you stop doing that and do end of turn stuff, or you keep going until everybody passes.
And
Have
there
some more
are
action
other
rolls.
alternatives,
Yeah.
actually.
Well, there are a
So
few.
it feels like, let's make sense of this. Let's actually go through the examples. I'll go through the examples that I've got, and then if there's anything that you want, maybe at the end, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So, firstly, this is Storm over Dien Bien Phu, which...
Right. Yeah, there's a whole series of Storm Over games which uses it, which is started with Storm Over Arnhem, which was when was that? That was quite an old. Was it the 70s or 80s? 70s, I think.
And this is an interesting one because you've got two sides, the Viet Minh and the French. And if you look here, there's an asymmetry on how it ends. So if you're the Viet Minh and you pass, then the French person has to discard a card in order to keep it going, which is interesting. Sorry. Down at there, do you see the bits I'm highlighting?
Oh, right. Yes, that's clever.
Yeah, so
I think this is the advantage of this type of mechanism, and I think we'll come back to my comments in a minute, but I think
feel free to comment on this example. Let's take them one at a time.
Well, one of the things I was going to mention was there's a concept in military operations called the Uda Loop. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's basically, it comes from a guy called John Boyd, who was a United States Air Force theorist and practitioner, and he did a series of presentations. He never really wrote much in depth about it, but the Uda Loop is a cycle of decision making, which is in this order: observe, orient, decide, act. So in military terms, that means that you observe, you find out what is going on with your own troops, with the enemy troops, the situation. Then you orient yourself. So you're actually, in this case, you're saying, right, how does this changed situation affect my own plans, and how might it affect the enemy? So you're orienting yourself to the situation. Then you decide what you're going to do. And you're usually weighing up different options and picking what for you is the best course of action. And then you carry that out, you act. So the Uda Loop is a key, or is nowadays seen as quite a key part of successful command and control. If you, the concept is, if you can get what is called inside your opponent's Uda Loop, then basically you have the initiative and your opponent has to dance to your tune. And that is a great advantage. Now, I think that if you have a traditional I go, you go approach to, particularly to a war game or to any other game, it means that you can't, there is no kind of Uda Loop thing. It's very difficult to get a command and control or initiative advantage.
Like you're talking about the prioritization that happens when you have to pick the area.
Yeah. Now, yes, exactly. So with a area impulse type of affair, you could, for example, say, right, well, I'll have my scouts at the front and I'll activate them first, so I know what's going on more, and then later on in the turn, I'll be able to activate my larger, more powerful forces once I can see what my opponent is doing. Or I might even say, well, this area, I'm talking about this in war game terms, this area, I've got a load of troops in a good position here. I'll put them in effectively on Overwatch. So they are activated, but they're ready to react to my opponent's move. And that's the kind of thing that you can do in a lot of war games. And the area impulse, because you've got smaller decisions to make, the area impulse mechanism, I think, promotes that command control subtlety.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is such a war game specific term, and it feels like I'm trying to formulate my thoughts. As a lot of these things, I feel we always come away having learned a little bit more just chatting, and I always just, but it feels like it's almost clear that, especially when I'm talking to you, we're going to end up talking about war, because war games aren't just facsimiles of war. They are meant to recreate part of it, and it's as much about capturing part of that reality as it is about, if not more, I think it's almost more about capturing part of that reality compared to the balance or the fun and engagement that you have within the game itself.
Yes, it's a model. The war game stuff that I'm talking about is generally a model of a part of reality, and it may be a realistic model or not a realistic model. I think with something like this area impulse mechanism, you perhaps can get a bit closer to reality, depending on how it's implemented. I mean, this is a mechanism I actually looked at using. Well, stepping back a little bit. One of my criticisms of the classification of area impulse is that it doesn't include the other types of activation as part of your units. For example, I mean, the two ones that occur to me immediately are activating a leader. So the classic one in wargaming, particularly, I suppose, miniature wargaming, but also some board war games, you activate a leader counter, and there's a radius of command that leader has, and it allows you to activate all those units. You use all those units, and then your opponent does the same, and you can come back and activate a different leader, etc. And the other one is activating
if you do that via leaders, you could have a little unit that's being activated twice by two different leaders who are in close proximity.
Usually you still only get to activate them once, and typically in a war game, if it's activated, you flip it over to show that it's been
because
activated.
That would be an interesting twist if you could say, okay, I either bunch all my leaders together and I flip over my leaders, but then the little units don't get used. I mean, I know that would be unrealistic.
Well, no, there are ways in which that can be done. I mean, typically, if you want to activate a unit a second time in the same round, you have to roll the dice to see if you succeed. That means you're giving players that decision. Do I want to take the risk? Because if you fail your roll, then your opponent or it ends the round or something like that will happen. And that risk, you bear that in mind when you're making that decision. But the other method is not leader radius, but it's unit type. So, for example, you can activate, I don't know, all your tank units or all your cavalry, which is another way of doing that. Activation is what I tend to call it. So leader radius, area, or unit type is a typical way.
I guess the other way you could do it is just one unit at a time. Like I've seen in a lot of miniatures games.
Yes. Yes, we do that in Airfix battles, actually. Airfix battle as well, usually it's one unit, one or sometimes two units at a time, but that's using cards. It's not using this mechanism. But that we do that for swapping from side to side. Now, the reason we do that in Airfix battles is because of the difficulty in downtime, and I think that's a key. If you've got a lot of units on the board, I go, you go, means there's a lot of downtime for the player who's not on their turn. And if you have this mechanism, at least everybody's getting to do things quite a lot. And that's,
I mean, we'll get to the key benefits and detriments later, but it feels like that's the key thing. Carrying on with examples, Storm over Madrid, as you said, there's a whole bunch of Storm over games, and this is just straight up take turns to activate areas until either everything's been activated or both players pass. That feels like the simplest way. I'm just going to point out, I've not played any of these games except for Eclipse, but I have just, lined up these rule sheets and had a quick look. I find this interesting where in Twilight's Imperium, you activate an area is a hex, despite Board Game Geek saying that you need to move away from hexes. I think the key thing is that these hexes are big enough that they can contain many units, so they're maybe not hexes as a wargamer would think of it. And it said, okay, you place your activation thing and then you bring in your units. And when I first read that, I was thinking, oh, does that mean that you could chain them and use the units multiple times? But no, because you cannot bring units from an area that's already been activated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so
The
that's really
difficulty,
clean.
yes, I mean, some of the examples here show the difficulty with area impulse is that you have to show in some way that the units have been activated. Now you can do this if you want by just flipping the counter over. That's a classic way of doing it, or you mark the area as having been activated. But generally they're moving, so marking the area doesn't work terribly well. So
well, here you're bringing units into that area rather than
right,
out
yes,
of that
right,
area.
out of area, yes.
So that is a key part. And that actually makes it feel much cleaner to me.
Yes, that's a very nice method, I have to say. Yeah.
Because you said that you've played Star Wars Rebellion, which
Yes.
basically does the same thing, which again, you move any ships from adjacent systems to the activated system.
Yes. Yeah. The other advantage which of this whole mechanism is that if you have a lot of troops in an area and you do stuff with it, you may want to hurry up. You may want to actually force the end of the round because you've done your stuff and you want to limit what your opponent's done. So it's automatically got a dynamic for, well, or at least it can, depending on implementation. It automatically got that dynamic for concentration or dispersal, and that's really quite a good mechanism. I mean, a friend of mine, Graham Tate, has got a couple of historical war games which aren't published yet, but they use this kind of approach. You activate an area, and ideally what you want to do is activate an area with a lot of troops in it. So you basically, the concept is you form up, you activate the area, they go and do some stuff. So it gives you a nice episodic kind of flavor to the game, rather than in the I go you go method, where if you can move everything, there's no necessity to form things up first. Which is, I mean, commonly what happens in real battles, if you like, is you are concentrating your forces first and then doing stuff with that concentrated mass.
Do you think it's fair to draw an analog to Blood Bowl? Because I know that Blood Bowl, you do all your things and then they do all their things. But in Blood Bowl, as soon as you fail an action, that's the end of your turn. So it gives it a bit of tension of, okay, which things do I want to prioritize? Maybe you start off with the things that have the greatest likelihood of success so that you get a longer turn. Or maybe you start off with the things that are really critical for you to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. That's the classic use of this kind of this kind of activation mechanism. A lot of war games have got this idea that you roll dice to activate, and if you fail, then your opponent gets their go. I've never really liked a lot of those very simple implementations because you can just fail to activate, and you know, say you have to roll anything but a 1 to activate. Now, how many times have you been in a game where you roll 3 1s in a row? Well, quite a lot, I would have thought, which means that could be 3 whole rounds and you can't actually do anything. And that's a bit of a problem for a very simple.
It makes it a little bit too frustrating.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of games have you automatically get 1 activation, and then every time you activate something else, you have to roll, and then the activation roll gets larger, and that's good because it means that you are always taking a risk with activation. But I think area impulse generally you don't have activation rolls. There's this sunset roll concept,
and even though we talked about the sunset dice, I would point out that Star Wars Rebellion, like Twilight's Imperium, does just carry on until everyone passes.
Yes.
So there's no sense of, oh, I'm going to concentrate my units, and maybe you won't get all the turns that you want. You will get all the turns that you
Yes,
want.
you will. Yes.
But it's just about it's about the timing rather than that. And because you can destroy units before your opponent gets to activate them, you might be thinking, well, if I initiate the battle here, I can do the concentration and it will be on my terms. And that is an interesting thing. Whereas
Yes.
if your opponent
Yes.
activates that area, but then if two areas are in a similar situation, you have to prioritize. And prioritization feels like the sort of interesting decisions that
Yes.
good games are made of.
Yes, that's the Uda loop there. You see, if I get to go first and I've already concentrated, I can activate my big area, go in, smash part of your force, and then you have. But if it was your turn, maybe you could concentrate before I could do that. So it's that getting inside your opponent's decision space. That's the interesting thing that this promotes.
I wanted
Any
to.
more examples?
I've got two more examples, which are kind of not really area impulse, even though our listening Board Game Geek has it. And I think we just want to still acknowledge them because this is unit type impulse, I guess it would be called. Eclipse 2. And it's a lovely game. I played it with Tony, actually, and a few other folk at one of the Bastions. And it's... how would... Because we're never going to talk about this at any other point, how would you compare unit type impulse and indeed radial impulse to area impulse?
That depends. It really is contextual. It really depends. I mean, there are places for this. I mean, the other game that has a lot of it unit type is Defense of Proton 3, which is Dave Turtz's massive 4-player asymmetric space game, which is great. Now, the space things in that have, admittedly, you're playing cards rather than you're playing cards to activate, but very often your cards are specifying which specific unit type or types you can activate.
Interesting.
That is a kind of attempt to reflect command control limitations, and I think that's fine. A bit like command and cut, the whole command and color system, and so what they're trying to do, what that mechanism is trying to do, is to say we recognize that that although we've got a top-down view of everything, we shouldn't have the ability to do everything we want to do it straight away. There should be some limits in what we can activate, and it's a choice. It's a design choice. I personally like the radius from a leader type choice because it's command control comes from leaders, so I like that. Well, I mean, in a lot of war game situations, it does. So I like that idea that it's automatically coming from the leader because it's the within the radius of the leader. It kind of vaguely reflects the idea. Say you've got a Napoleonic game that you've got some riders who are taking orders across to the units that leader commands. That vaguely makes. I mean, it's usually more complicated than that, but it makes sense within the context there. So using whichever one of these meets the demands of the design and the context that you're in, and these are space games, so you can make things up, which is quite fine. And whatever makes interesting decisions, I think, is good. Really,
I like cards, as you might have noticed from my games, and I do like the idea that actually with cards you could mix it up. You could have some cards that, and a very quick side note, should we call it area activation rather than area impulse?
I think it should be called area activation.
Okay, let's just call it area activation from now on.
Then you've got leader activation as well, which is great.
Yes.
And then you've got unit type or just type activation or unit type activation. Then you've got 3 different mechanisms.
And you've got single units activation.
Yeah, yes. Then you could just call it in a whole series of things called activation.
Yes.
Yay.
Let's call it that from now on. Okay, so I was just thinking that with a card-driven game, if the cards were telling you what sort of activation you're able to do, it could be that you've got leaders, that sometimes you've got leader activation, sometimes you've got an area activation where you can do parts of the board, sometimes you can do unit type activation, and that would be driven
I
by
like
what
it.
you've got in your hand. And maybe it could even be combined. I mean, this is completely unrealistic because my approach to games is based on a abstract, not even a simulation, an abstract connection of mechanisms, where I know that most war gamers would be aghast at this, thinking that doesn't make any sense in reality at all. But you know, you could be deck building to say, okay, do I want to pop the power of my leaders to make them activate more quickly, or do I want to concentrate in this part of the board to get more activations going on there? That would be interesting, I
It would be
feel.
very interesting, and actually there would probably are some applications to wargame design for a mix of those. I mean, for example, you could have a basic area activation system as your general thing, but you might have a situation where you have certain leaders who can override that by cards. If you a limited amount of leader activation alongside area activation might be very interesting, because it gives your leaders a bit more oomph, and there'll be very interesting decisions, especially if you have some kind of compensatory disadvantage for using your leaders. That might be very interesting.
And the final sort of I'm just going to call it area activation from now on. The final area activation game that we've got here is Rumble Nation. Photo from
Right.
and you see these areas. It's a little bit different. So on your turn, you've got the deployment phase where you have quick turns around where either you're deploying or you're using a tactics card. And if you deploy, then roll 3 dice, pick 2 of them. That determines which of these places you can deploy in, and you deploy according to the value on the 3rd dice.
Right.
The alternative is that instead of rolling the dice, you can use a tactics card, which allows you to do things within a certain area, but there's nothing to say you can't redo those areas. So it's missing the locking out of areas, if you know what I mean. But this almost gives credence to the idea that it's really the area activation that matters, as opposed to the flipping over and not being able to use the same units or the same area multiple times.
It's quite that's quite interesting. Yes, I like this last bit in bold. As soon as the players place all of their soldier cubes on the map board, tactic cards can be used. All remaining players must then deploy soldiers. So you've only got the ability to do tactics until someone has actually placed everything, and then you're just having to go with deploying. Oh, that's
Yeah,
now
it gives it a
that's
really
another
interesting
approach
sense of timing.
Yeah, that's another approach to how you get this command control thing moving. That's quite a nice way of doing that.
At which point you go to
Very
war, and then
right, yes, because
that's the end of the game.
It's strategic, isn't it? This game.
It feels like a fairly short, light game compared to a typical war game. As you can see, it's 30 minutes, so certainly not the kinds of epic things that war gamers would be used to. Are there any examples that you wanted to bring up, Alan?
Not directly of Area Impulse. I mean, I was thinking that the classic ones for leader activation are Combat Commander, that has well, if you use leaders in Combat Commander to activate multiple units. If you don't have a leader, you're just activating 1 hex. So it's a kind of vaguely area-ish, but supplemented or mainly from leaders. And also the one of the earliest of the modern style of war games, Napoleon at Waterloo, the advanced version of Napoleon at Waterloo, which is a classic hex encounter zones of control game that uses leader activation. So it's basically you can use all of your units, but only if they're within the command range of a leader, which is lovely, because it means that you have got that constraint that I want to have these guys over on that flank, But if I want to actually use them, other than just leave them there, I have to put a leader in command range. So there's a air of realistic command control limitation on that, which I do like a lot. If you can play the game without using the leader stuff, but it does change the flavor of the game a lot and brings it more into line with what we think Napoleonic tactics and command control might have been like. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good simulation, but it injects that slightly more realistic limitation on command control.
Quick hello, Sates. Hope you are generally well, and all the best with getting your stuff done. Let's carry on through our typical questions, and I'm aware that this seems to be going on a bit longer than usual, maybe because there was actually quite a lot to unpack with the
I think it's
how does it impact the game? How will it affect the experience?
I think this is the first one where we've been relatively critical, actually. I mean, we've generally been accepting the categorization, haven't we? We discussed how it impacts the game quite a lot. I mean, I think the Uda Loop thing is quite significant from my point of view. It means you have more decision points. So it means that the sequencing of your decisions becomes quite vital, and you've got that opportunity of getting the drop on your opponent a bit more than you have if it's just an I go you go. So that's a massive impact on the game, and the experience at the table means that you've typically got much less downtime using this method than the I go you go method.
Yeah, I think you covered it all. The less downtime, it might mean that also it's lessens the AP because you don't have to think about everything all at once. Yeah. Although you still have to have that holistic view of what you're going to do after this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mechanism that I'd considered for using for my Mission Command Normandy miniatures war game. I decided that because it's a figures war game, but I figured that the housekeeping of tracking who'd been activated was actually too difficult and would be too fiddly. So I went for I go you go in the end. But I did look at this idea that it wouldn't have been quite area, but it would have been like large unit or collection of units activation. But it's the housekeeping is
that's a fair point. It does add some complexity, and it does add some requirements for components, because if you have to flip over things to a used side and then there's a cleanup phase where you flip over everything onto the ready side, okay, as you say, that requires housekeeping and tracking, and is not exactly the most fun part. But secondly, it also means that those unit tokens can't now be double-sided for one with more health and one with less health. So it precludes other stuff. And I think, like lots of mechanisms, I come in and say, yes, there is a certain complexity level below which this is not an appropriate thing. I mean, fundamentally, how versatile is it? Moving stuff and there has to be lots of stuff that you activate. There has to be a map broadly that you activate this stuff on. And
yes, you are activating to do something.
It kind of feels kind of obvious that yes, this is very limited to war games and war game type experiences.
Yeah, I think so. I think the reason why it feels like that is because it gives you those opportunities to get the initiative over your opponent, which is a very wargamey thing. I suppose you could probably have a Euro style game which uses the same type of mechanism, but area. I mean, it's all about area. It's area activation is what we're calling it, which means that that automatically suggests territory, doesn't it?
Yes,
because you're activating to move. I suppose you could.
I'm just wondering if we try and move away from the war game and ownership of units, what would it look like in a game where you didn't control the units necessarily? So I activate this area, and I am the only person to activate that area. And because of that, I get to kind of activate the non-player units, and maybe you don't get to activate that area ever.
I mean, for example, you if you think of other things that move, not just units, you could have a trading game with some kind of area activation. I'm not quite sure what the area activation would actually mean in a kind of trading game, but you could envisage a trading game with area activation, couldn't you? I guess
Trains? Does that make sense?
trains, or well, it could be a whole variety of different transport mechanisms that you could have, but you can only move things. In fact, you could do.
Pollination?
How about this? You could do if a combination of wagons, early railways, combination of wagons and trains, maybe canals. So you can activate trains multiple times. Areas with trains and activated multiple times. Areas with wagons and only be activated once. You see, so you could do. Okay, I'm going to activate this area with wagons, move them to this other area which has got a train in it, and then later on somebody can move those things by train in the same round. So
and maybe it's got like a limited number of. It's kind of like a worker placement area activation system, where only a finite number of times can each thing be activated. And when you activate it, you activate your own trains plus the unclaimed trains that belong to everyone.
Yeah. Yes. Or maybe all the transport. Oh, maybe all the transport mechanisms are neutral.
All of it's neutral. And you're trying to use the trains to get the stuff to your side of the board?
Yes. I think we've got a game there, Bez. For sure.
Yeah.
So in that case, you can do it. That's actually quite interesting, potentially.
But it feels like it's very much a spatial thing. I mean, area activation, by definition, it has to be a spatially. It has to be. I think it has to be about a shared map. If it was individual maps, I don't think it would make any sense.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. But there are quite a lot of games, and yeah, I don't know if pollination is such a terrible idea either. When is it good? Who would enjoy it? I think that it does increase the toing and froing between the players. It maybe increases interaction, I would say.
Yes, I think it increases the complexity slightly because it's. I mean, because you've got multiple things you're doing. It's not just my stuff, then all your stuff. So therefore, it's a little bit more
considerations. Yes,
but so I think it's good it's good in a game where you've got that more complexity. So I think that the type of people who would enjoy it would be those who like lots of small decisions that add up to something larger.
Yeah, it's not a mechanism for
a beginner's mechanism.
Drama.
No, it's not a mechanism. But I don't know. It's not a mechanism.
I mean, I'm not saying it precludes drama, but I would say that it's not necessarily going to push drama to the foreground.
I was going to say it's not necessarily a new game as a kind of introductory type mechanism, but I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure about that.
I mean, I am very interested in this activation, and just because we're not together, I might have a go at doing that for this Friday, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
When is it bad? What issues might there be when adding it to a game? Like if I'm about to try this area activation thing, which is, without ownership of units, but even with the ownership of units within war games, what typical things do you need to think about to make it to mean that this mechanism works well and fits?
I think it's the aspect of tracking what has been used that's vital, really. And players have to be able to get their heads around that tracking what's been used and what hasn't been used. So simple thing like flipping the units over when they've been activated is probably what you need. I mean, one example that it uses unit activation rather than area activation, but similar, is Fighting Formations, which is by Chad Jensen, who did Combat Commander. This is a tank version of Combat Commander, where Combat Commander is mainly infantry, and uses hex activation, that lead radius activation. Now the trouble with Fighting Formations He's used a similar type of thing for activation, and you do flip the unit when you've activated it. But in order to get the flexibility that you need for unit strengths, he's had to make every unit have a breakdown of 3 units. So there you've got automatically got, oh my god. So if I want to do this, if I want to have, say, I have to split a unit up to vary the unit strength and spread them out a bit, because because flipping them doesn't work, because I'm flipping them to show they've been activated. So there's an overhead there in tracking, and it makes the game just that little bit more fiddly. And so although they're very similar designs, I would always play Combat Commander rather than Fighting Formations, simply because Fighting Formations is just that little bit fiddlier and takes longer. And that's the danger, I think.
I want to go back to Twilight's Imperium, where because you can't disperse the units, you only collect them into the activated area. It means that you only have to put a marker onto the area rather than the units, which does feel a lot cleaner. Yeah, and I really like that.
Yeah, that's very nice. So they've obviously addressed that tracking very successfully there. Yeah.
And so that is definitely a consideration. And the final question that we always ask is, have we used it in any games? Would we? I mean, I've not personally ever used it in any game, but I'm excited to explore this idea of area activation with a transport mechanism. I'm quite interested in that. And you said that you considered it for one of your games.
I considered it for Mission Command Normandy, but that was more... I'm not sure if it really counted as area activation. It felt a bit like it, but it was miniatures. It was in Mission Command Normandy. Generally, it's at company level, so a whole company will occupy an area. It's not a predefined area, but I would do it on that basis. So I haven't really. I mean, I suppose I was just thinking. I suppose
so it was more like a company activation where you were activating a group of units.
Yes, that's right. I suppose the March of Progress kind of uses it, but not really. I mean, when you play a card in March of Progress, you are activating 1 or 2 armies, or well, technically you could activate 3 for attacks, and they all do have to be in the same area. But I think that's a bit of a fiction, really. No, I don't think I've really used it.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point, because I mean, just playing, even though you can't say area activation or area impulse as it's defined there, it is, I'm sorry, badly defined on Board Game Geek.
Well, it's very specific. It's very tightly defined and very, very specific. So, for example, Airfix Battles has unit activation. I mean, and you alternate. You're alternating in the sense that it's used the term impulse. So, in Airfix Battles, I play a card which activates 1 or 2 of my units. Then you do the same, and we keep going until all the units are activated or we pass. So, I mean, in principle, the concept's very, very similar. It's just that it's not deterministically based on specific areas. It's actually conceptually unit based rather than area based. But yeah, it's strange that it's defined in that very constrained area impulse rather than just activation. I would have preferred.
It feels like it might have come about from one person being a big fan of this thing. I don't know, but it does feel like there's the area activation that you consider. How do you activate things? In this case, it's area activation. How does it finish? In this case, they give you all the options. It might be when both players are done. It might be when one player is done, the other player has to give extra resources, like discarding cards to keep going. It might be that there's a sunset die or some mechanism to catch players off guard. And then the final part to it is the nature that you don't get to activate everything. So it's a subdivision, which I think is inherent in the term area activation, because in principle it's saying, okay, you start your turn and like everyone does the setup and then it goes and then
Yeah.
you do some big end of turn. But imagine in a simpler game like March of Progress where it is just all game long. I
Yeah.
feel like that is still it feels like it is still fundamentally capturing the essence of area activation or area impulse to me.
It can do. Yes. I'm, for example, on Board Game Geek, if you want to find things which have got leader activation, you can't search on that. You can search on area impulse, but that's very specific. It won't bring you up a list of those with leader activation or with unit type activation.
I mean, what would be a good name for a collection of
what would it be?
subdivided activation, like area activation, leader activation, unit type activation, and individual unit activation?
It would be
Selected activation?
It's successive activation or a word that means one after the other.
See, that's interesting that you're focusing on the interplay between players, whereas I'm focusing on the fact that you don't get to do it all at once. But I think that
okay. It would be group activations or something. Group activations, activation by group. Well, a group could be one, but activation by group.
Yeah,
that sounds. I mean,
I'm not sure. That doesn't feel like the perfect thing.
You can't just call it activation, though, can you? Because
activation could be activation of everything.
Yes, it could be activation by group or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah. Feel like we should finish up. Otherwise, my computer's going to have problems. Apparently, which is. But I feel like we've had a good chat.
Yeah,
and it's at this point, question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. My question of the day is, what is your favorite type of milk? I have decided that my favorite type of milk is coconut milk.
Wow.
And but this is parts of my coffee subscription thing where I've been trying all the milks, and they do not give you fancy milks in the frappe or the milkshakes, presumably because it would be too expensive. You only got the choice of dairy milks in those.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, I found out that coconut milk is actually my favorite, even though. Good. So yeah,
that's good. Well, my favorite milk is actually full cream proper cow's milk. Actually, but I can't drink it because it disagrees with me now. It's the thing that's happened over the last 10 years or so. I've now found I can't cope with.
Is that because you've not been drinking it how it's hot because of being with Charlie?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's just that my body has changed as I've got older, and it because humans aren't supposed to be able to digest milk.
Wow.
And I've found that I can't, which is so. Now I drink rice milk. I'm quite happy with rice.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, in the comments, let us know what your favorite kind of milk is. We are curious. And over to you. What are you up to? You can share button if you want to. Is there something you need to do? Is there something you want to do? I still really would like to get more appointments sorted for Essen. I've reached out to some people, not all of whom have gotten back to me, of course. I've only got the 3 definite appointments, which is not great, but still better than nothing.
I haven't got any.
But you're there as a publisher. That's different.
Well, it is in a way, I guess. I often have some meetings planned. Some people approach me as well, which is interesting. So if anybody wants to pitch, let me know.
I am going to focus on that, and today I'm going to get some stuff done. Might even do some drawing or letters. I don't know. So I'm going to get stuff done today. That's what I'm going to do.
That's good. Well, I'm hoping that I might have some Kingmaker rules to review because we're getting to that stage.
When is it going live?
Kingmaker Kickstarter live on Monday, the 26th of September, which is
exciting.
Monday, so very exciting. Yeah.
So please be sure to tweet that and let me know, and I
Too
will
exciting.
share it. And so, recap and wrap up before we finish up. So to recap and wrap up, we started off chatting about places in Manchester, about all the shops, Fanboy Free, Travelling Man, and Buzzin' Meeples, which I heartily recommend everyone check out. If you're in Manchester, please do check out the new Buzzin' Meeples place. It is a lovely place and just needs to get started. It's a terrible time to start a business, not going to lie. But yeah, we chatted about the Tabletop Gaming Live event itself, which seems to be very successful for Alan and Surprise Terror Games. And we talked about a whole bunch of games, or Area Impulse, or as we've decided that it's Area Activation would possibly be a better name for it. And it might be that the phase ends when one person stops, then the other person has to discard resources to give it a bit of asymmetry. It might just be that everyone has to, everyone gets to carry on. And of course, there's other types of activation, like unit type activation, and cards might be based on the areas, but there's a whole lots of different variations on this. And I think that even though it is primarily all about things on a map, on a shared map that are moving around, because that's what, and you have to think for sure about what, how you're going to track the information that you need, how you're going to subdivide all the areas. Then I think that it could be really cool in a new game, like how we'll experiment with this Friday.
Excellent. That sounds great.
And if you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bears in all the places. Check out stuffbybears.com/streams to see what I'm up to. And if you want to check out Alan, where do you like to be found?
I'm at alan@surprisestaregames.co.uk. I have a blog on the Surprise Stare Games website, and I am Alan Paull on Board Game Geek and Bentham Fish on Twitter.
And
email. If you really want to get hold of me, email is best, actually.
Keep an eye out for that Kingmaker second. Well, no, it's not. I mean, there's been a lot of editions. What's your
second? The second Gibson's edition. There we go. I think it's technically it's about the 5th edition.
But share, spread the word, and thank you everyone, anyone watching, and thank you, Alan, for the lovely conversation. And to everyone, all I'm going to say is bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.